Okay. Year of Learning, sponsored by the Grobman, Linsenbaum, Markowitz, and Schwartz families, and member of Mr. Louis Linsenbaum, Lazer Ben Aryeh, beloved father, grandfather, and great-grandfather.
All right, good morning, everybody. Hope everybody is warm today. Occasionally, I will try to repeat, but very rarely, a class that we've given before, simply because I think it might be relevant. And I'm going to reprise a class I gave the last year, the year before, on the various halachas relating to snow. I thought it might be appropriate, given the weather that we've been having all across the country. Basically, the simple question is, from a halachic perspective, is snow considered a solid or a liquid? Is it a food or a drink? And the Gemara makes an interesting comment. Not one of the best known Gemaras, but it's in Maseches Nida, Daf Yud Zayin. And it says, Shelag eino lo ochel velo mashke. He says that snow is neither a solid or a liquid. It's not a food or a drink. And then it goes on to relate certain halachos about it. Chishev alav la'achila, if you consider snow as a food and you intend to eat it, eino matame tumas ochlin. It doesn't have any attachment to tumas ochlin, different types of tome related to food. But for mashke, if you consider it a drink, metame tumas mashke. So it attaches to it certain tuma of liquids. We don't get into details of tuma of solid versus liquids, but basically there is some debate in halacha as to whether snow is a food or a liquid. And it's interesting that snow is not considered a food or a drink. But if you designate it as a drink, then certain forms of tuma attach to it, but not if it's a food. And he said, the Rashi comments, that it has the properties of snow are more similar to drinks than to food. For example, the Gemara talks about honey or congealed blood in terms of what might be considered its normal state. And you can apply the same logic to snow, that it's normal to consider it a drink, but not normal to consider it a food. People melt snow to drink it as water. It's interesting, ice cream or ices. Are ice cream or ices considered a solid or a liquid? Because when you eat it, it melts.
What are you gonna have for dinner?
So it's an interesting question. For example, we are accustomed to making a separate bracha on dessert at the end of a meal, because that dessert is technically not part of the meal. But if you're drinking a liquid, it doesn't require a separate bracha at the end of the meal. And again, if you're having ices or ice cream at the end of the meal for dessert, does that require a separate bracha? It's a fascinating question. In our terms today, technically speaking, you probably would make a bracha because when you eat it, it's still in a semi-solid form. And it's a machlokas haposkim, actually, whether ice cream is more of a liquid than a solid. People actually discuss this in great detail. Rav Hershel Schechter weighs in on this machlokas, and he says that consistency is not necessarily a factor. It's only considered a drink if it's a beverage. You don't ask for a glass of ice cream to drink. And it's not something you ingest when you're thirsty. So if it's eaten as a food, even if it's technically a liquid, it's considered food. So if you have an ice cream, a dish of ice cream for dessert, you would make a separate bracha on it, even though it has elements of both. And here we get into fascinating halachos in terms of snow. Can you use snow in situations where you normally require a liquid? For example, can you use snow to fill a mikveh? Is that considered a kosher mikveh? And the Rishonim, most of the Rishonim say you can, if you have enough snow that when it melts, it equals 40 so, which is about 180, 190 gallons. So if you have enough snow to melt into that quantity of water, and this is a practical thing, because there are places, I know for a fact, I had friends who were chaplains in the army, and there was no mikveh anywhere near them, if you're in New Mexico or Texas, and the only way they could get a mikveh was to literally, and the army will do anything for religion, they will truck down loads of snow from the mountains to melt it, to make a mikveh. And it's a lot of trucks of snow. But they did that because there were some women who required a mikveh, and you're in Texas or in the desert in Utah or someplace, there's no other way to get a mikveh, not near a Jewish community, that's what they would do. But you have to have it, when it melts, it has to have enough water in it. The Rabbi is not keen on this. He says you could use snow to fill up or add on to a mikveh, but you can't make a mikveh entirely out of snow. And here we get into one of the most fascinating shuvos or discussions that I've seen, brought down by the Mordechai. In days gone by, our great-grandmothers were very sturdy women. And they lived in very cold climates in Eastern Europe. And they didn't always have a heated mikveh. They didn't always have a mikveh. And they had to usually use a lake or a stream sometimes if there was no regular constructed mikveh. And in the winter, this is problematic. Now, it's one thing if a guy is a chassid that he wants to go to mikveh every morning before he goes to shul, so he could chop a hole in the ice and dunk into the lake and go to shul and sit by the fire and warm up. If you ever read Chaim Nachman Bialik's poem Hamasmit, and he talks about the life of a young yeshiva bacher who gets up early in the morning and he chops a hole in the ice and he goes, and then he's freezing, shivering, but he gets to the base medrash and it's a nice fire, he warms up. It's a nice, very nice story by Chaim Nachman Bialik. But then in any event, what did the women do in the cold climates where there was no mikveh? They literally had to cut a hole in the ice or wait till it warmed up. I mean, the husbands weren't too happy about it. Well, apparently there was a husband that was not happy at all. His wife would not go to the mikveh in freezing cold weather, so he made her jump into the snow as her mikveh. The question is this field of snow adequate to serve purposes as a mikveh? It's a fascinating discussion. Now, a bigger discussion is why this guy wasn't whipped for spousal abuse. That's a separate issue. And they talk about that in a different context. But in any event, the permission of using a field of snow, again, if it's a huge field of snow, and there's enough snow to the equivalent of memsa, and it's not considered mayim she'uvim, drawn water, there's a big machlokas rishonim about that. Ravid and the Rush, as to whether you can make a mikveh. They agree you can add snow to a mikveh, but can an entire mikveh be out of snow, or if a field of snow? And then again, there are chumras and there are kulos. The Shach says no.
What did you ask me?
The Mishnah Brura
on Vipra now.
in an ancillary discussion,
In
he
case
says
I
that
need to use it.
if you're in a pinch,
Full of ice, you couldn't use it.
you could stick your hands in snow for Netilas Yadayim before Hamotzi. That you could, if there's enough snow, the big field of snow. So he is makel when it comes to Netilas Yadayim in terms of snow. I saw a fascinating tshuva, contemporary tshuva recently, about a fellow goes skiing. And again, separate question is whether you're allowed to go on vacation to a place where you can't get a minion. We'll leave that to the side. But he goes on a skiing trip, and he was going to cook his own meals. And when he gets to wherever he was staying, he realizes he doesn't have a pot. So he goes into town and he buys a pot. But being a frum guy, he wants to know, where can I go to tovel this pot in the ski country? There are no mikvahs around. There are no, the streams are all frozen. So the question was, can he take this pot and dip it in the snow? And is that considered adequate for Tvilas Kelim? And the psak was, if it's a big enough field to be a kosher mikvah, then you could probably do it. But it's, again, the questions that snow brings up are very, very fascinating. And the halacha does analyze these in tremendous detail. If it snows, for example, on Shabbos, so that entails a whole new group of halachos. You can't crush snow, for example, and put it in a cup to melt it. Not that it's muktzah, but you might be able to put it into a cup, let it melt by itself, perhaps. The Mishnah Brewer says when it rains, for example, rainwater is not muktzah, so the same might apply to snow as well. It doesn't mean you can make snowballs or snowmen, and that's a separate halacha of making things on Shabbos, of binyan, but snow on Shabbos has many, many ramifications. For example, the simplest one, the most important one, is, for example, they predict snow this Shabbos, I believe. Can you remove the snow from your sidewalk on Shabbos? And if you can, what is the most appropriate way to do that? So first of all, we have to understand what the halacha is of snow on your sidewalk. The Torah says that if you have a flat roof, you have to make a ma'akel gagecha. You have to put a fence around your roof so people shouldn't fall off. And based on that pasuk, the Torah, the whole sugya in Bava Kama about Barber Shus Rabim, that you are under a biblical obligation to make sure that nobody injures themselves on your property. If you have a hole, you have to fill it up and put a fence around it. If something is slippery, you have to get rid of the ice. And if people can't walk because of snow and they fall and hurt themselves, you have an obligation to remove that snow on Shabbos. Now, you can't obviously use a snow blower. You can't use an electric shovel. However, shoveling snow, or perhaps even possibly putting salt on the snow so it melts, is certainly something that has to be considered halachically, because you don't want someone, which is a biblical prohibition, to fall and hurt themselves on your property. So one of my pet peeves, I know most people don't walk in Fair Lawn, but when it snows, there are people who do not shovel their walks. Non-Jews, Jews, whoever they are, and it forces you to walk in the street where there are cars on an icy road. Very dangerous. And I don't know why the town doesn't go out and issue summonses for all these people that don't shovel their walks promptly.
They do.
On Moreland Avenue, apparently they don't. Well, it's very hard to call on Shabbos morning when you walk into shul. Yeah. Now, the preferred, obviously, if you have somebody on call to shovel your walk for you, that would be preferred. There's a fascinating story that I heard about Rabbi Yisrael of Greene, the Rizhiner Rebbe. He was a very, very wealthy Hasidic Rebbe. Most of the Hasidim were very, very poor. He was a wealthy man. They were very impoverished. And he had these big black leather boots that he used to wear. And whenever it would snow, especially on a Shabbos, he could be seen early in the morning walking back and forth on the street with his big boots, so that, because many of us Hasidim who hardly had shoes to wear, wouldn't have to trudge through the snow. He made a path. Putting sand on the snow, if it's not too deep, so people don't slip and slide, is the easiest thing to do. It involves the least violations of Shabbos. Putting salt on the snow is probably permissible because it's the melted snow is, you don't necessarily, it mixes with the salt and it's not apparent that it's being melted directly because of your action. Interesting, there's a whole discussion about the difference between melting snow and urinating on snow. There happens to be discussion about, yeah, you have to remember, we didn't always have indoor plumbing. And people either had to go outside or use a chamber pot. So can you empty the chamber pot or urinate directly onto the snow? And most poskim would say no, because unlike salt, it's very apparent, I mean, through color and otherwise, that you're melting the snow because of that. So there's a whole discussion actually about this because it was a reality. We don't appreciate the miracle of indoor plumbing because it's in days gone by when it was very, very cold, you didn't want to go outside when you had to go to the bathroom, and that these were issues that people had. Okay. Along those lines, about removing snow on Shabbos, and again, if you have to shovel snow to prevent somebody from falling and tripping, if you're on a sidewalk that a lot of people walk by, if you're on a side street, nobody's walking there, it might be less of a problem. But shoveling snow because somebody shouldn't get hurt, preferably if you get someone else to do it, fine. But if you have to do it yourself, you certainly can. And the Gemara calls a person a chassid who is very meticulous to make sure nobody gets hurt because of their negligence. And this is in the category of Bor B'Shus Rabbi. And the Rambam and other poskim hold that as a very serious aveira, all based on putting a fence around your property and your roof. So
Rabbi?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. You talk about removing snow because, excuse me, if somebody, it's an area where people would walk and you don't want anyone to get hurt. What about just for yourself, like to get out of your door and get to the street, let's say, so you can walk to shul or something like that? Your own personal walkway is not where others will dafka be walking, but it's for your own safety and to get out of your own house to bichlal or to get to shul. Is that the same premise?
I would think that would be in the same category. I think that would be in the same category, at least to get you out of the house, to enable you to walk down your steps without tripping or falling. So again, if you have to leave the house, then you can clear the snow. If you can stay inside and not leave the house, and you weren't planning to go to shul because of the ice and the cold and the snow, then, and as long as nobody else is going to walk on it, then you wouldn't do it. But if you needed to get out of the house, or somebody's going to walk by, and I would extend it one step further. There are many people in Fair Lawn who walk their dogs. And they also shouldn't be forced to walk in the streets. So if people walk their dogs and they're walking up and down your sidewalk, they shouldn't have to trip and fall either. So this is a very serious halacha of Bor B'Shus Rabbim. And again, the ideal would be to arrange with somebody in advance. If you know it's going to snow, arrange with somebody, preferably a non-Jewish person, to come and remove the snow. And if it's done on a what they call a kabbalah basis, where regardless of what day it happens, he's there to move the snow, whether it's Shabbos or a weekday, there's no problem to do that. But if you didn't make arrangements and you have to clear the walks, nobody falls, then this would be certainly advisable to do and meritorious to do so.
Wally,
So, yes,
this is only if there is an Eruv. If there's no Eruv, you can't shovel in Rosh Hashanah.
yes, of course. We're talking about that if there is an Eruv, naturally, yes. If there's an Eruv. Or again, some people, it depends on how your house is constructed also. If your own property is enclosed with an Eruv, whereas the entire town is not, that would also be permissible. But yes, the assumption is that you live in a town where there's an Eruv. Yes, question.
So you're saying that an error would take place over a person's life?
Well, that's a difficult question. If there's no Eruv, it would be very hard for you to shovel the snow. And that would be problematic on a Shabbos. And again, I understand the question. Saving a life, again, Pikuach Nefesh usually is Doches Shabbos, but that if it's happening at the time. If there's a possibility that somebody might walk by, that wouldn't necessarily be Doches Shabbos. So it's a great question, and I would have to say, just based on my limited knowledge, that if there's no Eruv, you wouldn't be able to shovel the snow on Shabbos. That would be my initial reaction. Hopefully, if you, I said sand is probably better than salt because sand at least gives you traction. It doesn't necessarily melt the snow, but salt would be permissible under these circumstances to avoid anybody having an accident. But there are many halachos referring to snow: the Tilas Yadayim, mikveh, Tvilas Kalim, using it instead of a mikveh. These are all fascinating questions that come up because we've had Jews living in many different climates. People who live in Hawaii have different shilas. People live in Alaska. People who live in cold climates, these are real questions that Chazal have dealt with, and Ein Chadash Tachas HaShamesh, there's nothing new, and they all discuss these questions. The key question goes back to that Gemara in Nida as to whether or not snow is considered a liquid or a solid, and from a technical aspect. But aside from that, it's just a fascinating subject to discuss, given that we still have snow on the ground and there's probably more coming this Shabbos. So preferably arrange for somebody to shovel your walk for you. But if worst comes to worst and you're in a trafficked area, you should shovel the snow yourself so nobody gets hurt or injured. And that's what I
Rabbi?
want. Yes.
So you said, like, if there's no Eruv, you can't shovel and stuff like that. But if you're walking out of your house, you're not going to shovel, but sort of a la the Vishnu Rebbe that you talked about with his big boots, and he used to walk back and forth to mat down the snow because his husband didn't shoes. So, if someone walks out of his house, so he's going to make tracks. He's going to make some kind of path in the snow. So I imagine that it's not okay to walk back and forth.
It's an interesting question because technically you're not violating any particular strictures concerning Eruv. So you're just walking back and forth. It's a fascinating question.
Why is it even a problem?
What's that?
Why is that even a problem?
Well, because you're walking back and forth to make a path.
So it's no worse than shoveling.
Yes, exactly. Shoveling requires an Eruv.
I understand. So since you don't have an neighbor, you walk back and forth, it should be.
It would probably be okay. It would probably be, it would not be a major problem. I don't see that being a major problem, walking back and forth if there's no Eruv, just to tamp down the snow. I can't see that being a problem. I mean, again, you're dealing with the whole biblical notion of Bor B'Shus HaRabim, And if this avoids that on a quasi, not even rabbinical level, I don't see that would be as a major problem.
Problem is getting it up on Saturday night.
Yeah, the problem is, because as opposed to shoveling, when you're clearing an area, when you step down, the snow is still there, and it freezes afterwards. And then you're walking on a patch of ice. So that could be more of a problem afterwards.
How about for the kids that want to pick up the snow, make a snowball?
No, snowballs definitely prohibited on Shabbos. Snowballs, snowmen, forts, definitely prohibited on Shabbos. You're forming it's boneheads. It's a form of building things.
Snow itself looks up.
Snow itself is not technically muktzah. I don't think so. No, I don't think it would be muktzah if you wanted to make a snowball out of it. Snow by itself is like water practically. It's like rain.
Wally,
Yes.
what about sledding?
Yes, sledding, again, if you're in an Eruv, you might think sledding is permissible. The only problem is the sled makes grooves in the snow. And that's a problem on Shabbos.
Yep.
It's like digging a hole. So that you wouldn't be able to do. So sledding, now, it's interesting, sledding in the old-fashioned sleds with the metal runners, but if you have a sleigh, which is a flat bottom thing, which does not necessarily make a groove, that would be a whole other question. And then you get into the whole discussion of what's appropriate activity for Shabbos or not. And that's more of a hashkafic question than a halakhic question. But I would say off the top of my head, sledding for sure is prohibited. And sleighing usually requires a horse to draw you. So I don't think we have that problem in Fairlawn or anywhere else in Jersey right now.
What about pushing a baby carriage in the snow? The wheels are making marks.
Yes, definitely not allowed. I mean, pushing a baby carriage in the snow, you're making a furrow, And, I won't get involved in the bigger question, do babies belong out in that kind of weather in the first place? Separate question. It drives me up a wall when I see mothers bring these little pitzelak to shul in the rain and the snow and the sleet. But again, even if an Eruv is there, you compare this to a person who drags a bench across a muddy field on Shabbos. You're making a furrow, and that's one of the ovos malachos that you can't do on Shabbos. It's called ofer guma.
Wally,
Yes.
isn't the prohibition of a furrow because of planting? And you're not planting in the ice or snow?
It's definitely related to making a furrow for planting, but the furrow itself is considered one of the ovos malachos. Planting is a malacha, but so is digging a hole or making the furrow. Whether it's related to planting or not, it's still considered one of the ovos malachos. And that's something you can do. Again, whether it's miskavein, ain't miskavein, if you're in your backyard on a Shabbos afternoon, you want to pull a chair over to another side and accidentally cause a furrow in the grass, that wasn't your intention, and that's a separate question. But normally we try to avoid doing that on Shabbos. Anything else? Okay, hopefully there won't be too much snow on Shabbos. People should stay safe out there. Be warned.
I have one more question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
I know you talked in the beginning about putting snow into a cup. If the purposes of it were, and this is from my children, to make a snow cone, meaning put a cup out on Shabbos, it collects the snow because they used to like to eat it. They used to do it during the week all the time. And they would ask me on Shabbos, can I do it today? And of course, being home without somebody, local rabbi in my house, I don't know, ask Saba, and then they would forget by the time Shabbos ends.
Interesting. Can you collect snow to make a snow cone on Shabbos? So it's interesting. If you're collecting snow in a cup just to eat the snow, there wouldn't be a problem in that because you're eating the snow without wanting it to melt. Putting flavors on it, which somehow melts the snow, might be a problem.
They eat it straight.
If they eat straight snow, that, I can't see that being a problem. What's that? Yeah, it's Soveya, and whether it's Soveya ba'ochel is a machlokas a poskim. It's all kinds of problems putting flavor on it. But just to eat the snow in a cup, that's not a problem. If the purpose is not to melt it, just to eat it, that would be, I don't see that being a problem. So they can go out and have cups of snow on Shabbos.
I'll let Noam know.
Let them know. Okay. Can Arya go ice skating in the backyard?
I believe they're gonna do that when they get home from midterms today.
Very good. Okay. Okay, everybody, stay warm and safe out there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Rabbi Steiner,
Thank you, Wally.
Jenna, we're off with the Gadolot, Rishus, Komsum Khan, Vrek Shachal Mishalo. Baruch Shachal Mishalo, Tu Achayinu. Who knows the lach, not always again. Ki hu yazon of an ace like Kobe, Tibla Kobe, Himazon, Kobe, Yasov, Asher, Boro, Brokato, the Roy Yazon, Esako. Baruch atah Adonai al haaretz v'al hamazon. Unei Yerushalayim ir hakodesh meira v'yameinu. Baruch atah Adonai v'leverachamo v'Yerushalayim. Amen.
Okay, so Thursday, Friday next week. Thank
Thursday
you.
or Friday of next week. Okay.
Yes, if you want to do something on that, that's Thursday.
Serving dried fruits and nuts.
Probably, yeah, besides the cake.